Happy Thursday, everybody. This is Brandon Busteed, President of University Partners at Kaplan, and welcome to our latest Bold Leaders in Learning. I'm thrilled to have Kate Eberle Walker with me today. She is the CEO of PresenceLearning and also the author of very soon to be released, I think in about 3 weeks, the book called The Good Boss, 9 Ways Every Manager Can Support Women at Work. So Kate, I know you're also a former Kaplanite. You've had many roles across the education sector and other industries. I would love to just have you start with telling everybody a little bit about your fascinating background and also a little bit about PresenceLearning. I know we're going to talk about the book mostly, but I certainly want to make sure we have time to hear more about you and about Presence.
Thank you, Brandon. Thanks for having me. So I started my career in finance and then migrated to the education industry, where initially I remained deal focused. So I was doing M&A and investments for Kaplan for a long time, and that's really how I got to know the industry so well. About 7 years ago, I realized after so many years evaluating education businesses from a transaction perspective that I had fairly strong opinions about how to run an education business. So that was the point when I joined IAC, which owned Tutor.com and the Princeton Review. And when I was 39, I got my first CEO gig at the Princeton Review. And as you said, currently I'm now CEO of PresenceLearning. So at PresenceLearning, we provide teletherapy support services to K through 12 special education teams. So what we're doing is really helping them ensure that students with disabilities receive the therapy that they need to be supported in school. So we're working in schools across the country, all online, providing online evaluations and teletherapy services. So it's been it's rewarding work to do at any time, but particularly for this past year, as schools have been closed or on hybrid schedules, it's really been an opportunity for us to jump in and help a lot of schools still stay connected with their students.
Yeah, and I know you guys were on a strong growth trajectory prior to the pandemic, but my guess is the pandemic has really accelerated the need for services like PresenceLearning provides. Maybe just give us a little sense of what kind of scale you guys are operating on now, what kind of, how many schools you're helping power, just in any of those data points that you're willing to share.
Sure. So we've definitely expanded our reach during the past year. We now work with about 700 school districts. So that's about 3,000 school sites across the country. We are getting very close to having conducted 3 million therapy sessions over the lifetime of the country. And what has really been, impactful for us this year is expanding what we did from, prior to the pandemic. Everything that PresenceLearning did was providing service. So schools were sending caseloads to us, and our therapists from our network were conducting the therapy or were conducting the evaluations. We're still doing a whole lot of that, but we also recognized a new need in this past year to license our teletherapy platform to schools for their own employees to use and to do professional development around what we call teletherapy essentials. So, how do we help this very large workforce out there in schools across the country that has always done their work in building, adapt very, very quickly this year to be able to do their own practice online. So with that, we've brought thousands more clinicians onto our platform when you combine our own therapy community with the school-based teams, and collectively they completed a couple million sessions over the past year. So there's a lot of teletherapy happening.
Yeah, well, it's incredible. I mean, incredibly valuable service, obviously more valuable now than ever before. And congratulations on the contributions that you and your team are making to a lot of us out there. So, as a segue, obviously we set up this time to talk about your new book, The Good Boss. And of course, I don't know anybody who doesn't want to have a good boss or a better boss. And there's a lot in your book that resonated with me in the 7 years I spent at Gallup in my previous role there. Gallup's obviously done a lot of research on workplace engagement and insights about managers. And one of the first things that was in my mind as I started reading your book is that 70% of the variance of workplace engagement, whether somebody is engaged in their job, is accounted for by who their manager is. And in simple terms, you've either got a really good one or a bum one, right? And so you don't work for a company necessarily. I mean, you do, but that experience of that company is shaped either in a very good way or a very negative way by good or bad bosses. So I came into your book immediately thinking about that stat. Just tell me a little bit about there's for those of you who haven't gotten it, because it's pre-released, I got a pre-read. It is an outstanding book. It's incredibly relatable. The stories are awesome. I think your 9 rules that you've laid out are very memorable. They're easy for people to understand and digest, for managers to make practical. Anyway, I'm a huge fan. Recommend it to everybody. Just tell us a little bit about your motivation for writing it. What was kind of that driving thought as you sat down to think about a book project?
Sure. So here's where I started from. When I knew that when women are successful, we tend to pay it forward to more women. We mentor, we give opportunities, and I very much benefited from that cycle. I worked for a female CEO, and then she promoted me to be her successor. But with 95% of Fortune 500 CEOs being men, there just aren't enough women leaders to do all the mentoring that is needed. So I set out to write a book that would give, tips and tricks to all the young women who wanted to get ahead, but didn't have their own personal female mentor. But I realized something as I started working on the writing project. I was interviewing a lot of successful women, and I would always ask them, what was the key to your success? What are your tips? What are your tricks? And I kept hearing versions of, I didn't really do anything in particular. I just had a really good boss. So it was exactly as you say. It was that, that good boss. And it's true. A good boss makes the difference in a woman's career. So I decided I wanted to write something that would teach more managers how to be good bosses. And it's written for all managers, but I'm particularly excited about the early response I'm getting from what I call the well-intentioned male manager. And 2/3 of all managers are men, and in my experience, the majority of them very much want to do the right thing to support women, but also very much don't know what that is all the time. So this book is aiming to tell them in practical, simple ways.
Yeah, and let's start with the first rule that you have in there, which is call her by her name. And again, as soon as I saw the title and before I dove into the full chapter, I thought about another stat that comes from Gallup research, and that is in the workplace, a surprisingly large percentage of us are not called by the name we prefer. And no one has bothered to ask us what name we prefer, right? It was and you talk about it from a number of angles, right? Like not pronouncing somebody's name properly or not spelling it correctly, giving somebody a nickname that they don't want to have. But you also talk about it through the lens of being called things like young lady. And so let's start there. Call her by her name. Tell us a little bit about your rule on that one.
Yeah, this rule is, I put it first in the book, and I call it the most basic of all rules. And it was funny because when I started writing it, I debate, is this too obvious? Is this too simple? But it is, perhaps the most violated rule in the workforce, in education too. I talk about in the book, and I think a lot of us in this field have seen the stats around, children and what happens to their motivation in an educational setting when their teachers don't pronounce their names correctly. So, getting someone's name right is just it's essential for making them feel respected. And, in all of these ways, whether it's someone using a term of endearment or applying a nickname, or, when you get married, not remembering what you changed your name to or commenting on what you changed your name to, all of these things really do take away from feeling respected in the workplace. And I think it connects to another real challenge for a lot of women that I hear, which is, you'll correct it once, but you start to feel awkward. It starts to put this burden on you. If you're like, am I going to correct this person for the 3rd time? Now, do I sound like, I'm being a pain or I'm being a stickler? And, it just can create what I think of as, very, very wasted energy, the more time during the workday that you're spending, having these debates in your head about, should I speak up again and and tell this guy that he got my name wrong for the third time, or should I, just live with it?
Yeah, and that relates to one of the other rules you have, which is, speak up so that she doesn't have to. I mean, you provided a lot of examples of situations where, somebody was saying something inappropriate, or they called you by, your name after you'd already corrected them once, and now it's the third offense. And, it puts someone in an awkward position of, making it, as you called it, a thing if you complain too much about it, right? But those interventions from others go a long way, and they don't necessarily have to be so brave and courageous, right? Like the one example you shared during your investment banking days was a steak dinner with 11, men. You were the only woman at the table, and there were some inappropriate things said. And one of them, who was a lawyer, said, as your lawyer, I wouldn't advise you to say that. And it ended the conversation. And I mean, but like the point is,
and it was so much, it cost him so much less to do that than it would have cost me. I mean, to say I was the only woman in that situation. I was the youngest. I was not powerful. I was the junior most person on that deal team. And here was this very, very senior partner at a law firm that we were working with. And for him to say it, cost him nothing. And it really moved the conversation forward, and it extracted me from a feeling of real discomfort. So it's a good example. It's simple. It's an easy thing to do, but it can make all the difference in these moments of discomfort.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just a good reminder for all of us, right? When we're in those situations where obviously the person saying it isn't aware, or doesn't have, the wherewithal to recognize what they're doing. Maybe they're just a jerk. But, there's a lot of other people who, I think they feel like it has to be some big courageous act to intervene. And it can be a rather simple step. We've got a question. I hope I represent it right. Ernie's asking, he says, can skip level managers overcome potential gaps or issues related to a direct manager? I think what he's saying is, a manager at a higher level, right? Like, does the upper echelon of management matter, right? Can that make up for a bad manager below him or her? How would you handle that type of situation? What remediation tools would you recommend in that type of a construct?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because that actually does happen a lot. And it's a good thing in an organization if employees feel like they can skip a level and they have, enough of an open dialogue with the next layer above their manager, or even the layer above that. I mean, I try to encourage this in my own organization. I have one-on-one conversations with every single employee when they join the company, and then, do check-ins across levels, throughout and on an ongoing basis, because I think it's really important to make sure that everyone in a company has, feels like they have more than one person, more than only their direct manager to talk to. That said, I don't think it's okay to, leave that, to just work around that direct manager and, accept that, well, if you're not getting something from him or her, we can work around it at the next level. But I think what it can do to have those conversations is really, really push the more senior person to take responsibility and use their influence and their power to address it, and to figure out how to make a change, so that it's so it's coming from above, instead of putting all the burden on the younger woman who's in the situation.
Yeah, and it relates to one of the other points you make, right? Which is, it's important at every layer. So you even suggested, a simple idea of ensuring that at the board of directors level of every organization, there are at least, I forget what you said, 3 or 4 female members of every board, right? Like, that seems to be a very tangible, straightforward idea, but it obviously suggests that leadership at every level matters. It's not just the direct manager. That direct manager may be more responsible for the majority of your world within that organization, but it's every layer that needs to be examined around this.
Yeah, definitely. And the more diversity you have at every level, just the more perspectives there are in every conversation that's happening, the more open it feels, the more open I think it really becomes. It becomes not so hard to feel like you're one person who's different, who needs to interject.
I know one of the things you encourage in the book is that people could read it all the way through, or they could jump into any of these 9 rules wherever you want to go. I know a couple of the ones that I jumped to quickest because I was interested in what they were. Rule number 4, don't sit in her chair. Can you tell us about that one and the story behind it?
Sure. So this rule number 4 is about, it's a story that actually happened to me when I was coming back to the office after my first maternity leave. That morning, for anyone who hasn't gone through this or been close to someone who has, a mom's first day leaving home after she has her first baby and going back into the office is very, very difficult. It's hard to leave your child. You're leaving them with, some caregiver and, just getting back into the habits of commuting and getting to the office. So you've already had you've lived a whole day before you even set foot in the office. And that's how it was for me. I walked in to my office and, rounded the corner to, get back to my desk, hang my coat on my hook and all of that, starting to feel that feeling of getting back into the habits. But what did I find is one of my male colleagues had taken my office. So there was somebody sitting in my chair, literally sitting in my chair. And, it escalated into a bit of a turf war between us where I had to fight to get my office back. And it was a very difficult start to that first day. You want to feel like, you're needed at home. You want to feel like you're needed at work as well. And, when you come back, and this happens to a lot of women, when you come back and there's literally your physical space has been, changed, moved, taken from you, your projects have been reassigned to other people, it can really feel like there's no place for you there anymore. And, that's where I really invite managers to, take simple steps, starting with that first day back, to make her feel welcome and necessary and, help her reintegrate into the workforce. Don't kind of leave her out there, fending for herself and fighting for her chair back.
Yeah, when I first read it, I thought that's a ridiculous story. And then I took a step back and I thought, you know what, that's probably happened a lot more than anybody would care to believe. And anyway, it relates, you segued a little bit to the next one you talk about, which is watch the clock. And, this one has a lot of implications. It did long before the pandemic. I think there's some refreshing things that might change as a result of the pandemic on this one, but tell us about what you mean by watch the clock.
What I'm talking about in this chapter is really, it's time and the value of time and how important it is for everyone at work, but particularly for a working mother to keep to the schedule. And so what often happens and can be really, really stressful, especially if it happens at the start of the workday or at the end of the workday, is, a casual shifting of a meeting can have, a significant domino effect of tasks that she now has to take on to make sure that, if she has to leave to come into the office an hour earlier, well, who's getting the child to school or to daycare? Can she get somebody to come an hour earlier? And then, same thing on the back end. And so this was something that I experienced a lot in my early motherhood years when, I was not the one calling the meeting or running the meeting. I was, an attendee in a lot of meetings, and things would get shifted around or would start late and run late. And, I think that can seem like no big deal to someone, especially if they don't have, a reason that they have to get out by a certain time, or, for a lot of men, they might have a spouse who's covering that, and they're not thinking about, I have to be home by 6:30, I have to be home by 7, whatever it is. But, most women are, bound by these other things in their life. And it's so stressful when you're sitting in that meeting and it's just going on and you're looking at the clock. And, what I advise in that situation is, again, for the manager to be aware of it and to be the one to speak up and, either say, let's wrap up and continue this tomorrow, or, Kate, it's okay if you need to leave, whatever, works in the situation. Just, again, a lot of these a lot of these chapters will reinforce certain major themes. And the biggest one is, understand the stress that she's feeling, and you do something about it as the manager instead of, letting her sort of live in her own inner stress.
Right. And it relates a lot to what we'll just call the broad topic of workplace flexibility in terms of when hours are worked, where those hours are worked. Obviously there was I'll call it a growing trend of, work from home flexibility provided by companies before the pandemic. The pandemic has, turbocharged that into a total different, category where there's a lot of people that have realized they could literally do their job entirely remote, almost entirely remote. I'm just curious your thoughts on, I think there's going to be a positive ramification of the pandemic from the workplace perspective in that, not just for women, but everybody in general, to have a lot more acceptance by companies, by managers, by teams to work remotely, maybe not entirely, but most of the time, or, to understand and appreciate that, you might be working hours on the evening or weekends that, aren't necessarily showing up in the 9 to 5 time frame, Monday through Friday. But tell us your thoughts about, pandemic influence on some of this. I mean, are you as hopeful as I am that this is going to be a positive outcome in terms of employer acceptance of flexible work hours and work from home?
I think that employers and colleagues are now much more aware of the intermixing and intermingling of work and home life. And I think it really has led to more acknowledgement and more understanding. So I think that's going to be a really good thing that carries forward. I think there is also just, there's much more experience and understanding given to, the concept of remote work. I mean, so many more people are doing it this year, and managers are seeing that, the work can get done in this way, that, you don't necessarily need to come into the office every single day. And with that, and with the, saving the time on the commute and the coordination, I think it's huge. It adds up to something really big in terms of flexibility. I think that what's going to be so important to come out of the pandemic in a positive place for women is acknowledging that, in this year, yes, there was a lot more remote work, but it was remote work with kids at home. And there was, a little too much intermingling, right, of work and home, and not a lot of control over when it happened. And, I've heard a bunch of stories from women in my company about these stressful moments they've had this year where they're on a Zoom call. One of them was with me. It was one of the women on my team told me months later that her most stressful moment of this year was she was in a Zoom call in a group meeting that I had hopped into to, check in on what the team was doing. And her 4-year-old daughter had come in to the room and started like banging her head with a pool noodle. And she said it was as she was talking, as she was presenting, and she's like, and I just kept talking and going as if, I wasn't being, assaulted by a pool toy. And she's like, and all I could think was, what does my CEO think of me right now? And I told her, I was like, honestly, I don't remember that at all. Like, I think that, we're also conditioned to tune out extraneous elements of the environment and just get through that. It had absolutely no negative impression on me, but you feel the stress in those moments, and you feel the lack of control. And for a lot of women, that has added up to them making decisions this year to leave the workforce. And so if we want to come out of this, yes, embracing remote work and acknowledging that flexibility is good, I think we also need to think about some on-ramps back for some of these women who have left. We just had someone who made the decision to leave when about 5 months ago, when she just couldn't reconcile for herself the balancing of taking care of her young son with her job. And I'm so excited. She just came back. Last week was her first week back. And I think it's incumbent upon employers to be reaching out and opening up, whether it's for women who worked at your company and left that you want to bring back, or just being open in general, not questioning these gaps, so to speak, in someone's work experience, because we've got to bring a lot of women back to get back to a positive place here.
Yeah, and that, that relates to one of the things you and I were talking about right before we went live, which is, there's been a lot of ramifications of this pandemic, obviously, horrific death toll. One of the more depressing outcomes has been a new term that's now a thing that we call a she session, right? Not a recession, it's she session, because the vast majority of the jobs lost have been women leaving the workforce for various reasons. You've obviously, pointed out a couple of the simple examples, but you're right. Now there's got to be thought into how do we help them come back, right? What forced that issue in the first place? I mean, obviously being much more cognizant of the watching the clock type issues and understanding the child care burden that largely still falls too much on the shoulders of women. So I don't know. What are your thoughts about this broader thing that we now call a she session? Like these are major new challenges that every organization is going to have to grapple with. And I would just love to hear more of your thoughts on that front.
Yeah, I mean, we lost millions of women who exited the workforce in this past year, largely due to childcare needs, household needs, and it happened because of things that were there before the pandemic as well. The workplace was not built by women. It was not built for women. And, a lot of what we've talked about today, what I talk about in the book is, we have to proactively create supportive environments, better environments that actually do make it better for women. And, in this case, we're digging out of an even deeper hole. It's not just, let's be proactive and let's get incrementally better. It's we've got to catch back up, and we've got to, as I said, bring millions of women back into the workplace. And I hope that there's been a lot more attention paid to the shortfalls in childcare in the country. And I think, that created a lot of these challenges over the past year. It creates a lot of the stresses and frictions that are, in and around the work experience of women. But, what I really emphasize always is that doesn't mean that women don't want to work. They want to work, and it's incumbent upon managers, companies, and their policies and their processes and the supports that they create to build an environment where women can work too.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your good thinking on that, and I wanted to save. We got about 3 minutes left. I wanted to save the round out for a bit of I think the most entertaining title of your 9 rules. But obviously a really important one. You titled the rule, "Be an Equal Opportunity Asshole." And so very provocative. I was very eager to hear what you had to say there. So tell us about what that means.
Sure. Yeah. Rule number 8. So what that rule is about is, I basically say it's not the worst thing to challenge women and to be aggressive in doing so. If that's how you treat the men, treat the women that way as well. It is a form of respect. It's a form of honesty and directness. And, it's a lot of women feel this, this sort of misplaced chivalry where managers, especially male managers, can be a little too careful. And, you get this feeling of, maybe he's not really telling me what he thinks because he's worried I'm going to cry or something. And, what this rule is about is, if you would have been hard on a man on your team about something, if you would have pushed him, if you would have challenged him, do that for her too. She really does want it. And we all want to be challenged. We all want to learn from our managers, and you're not going to learn if someone doesn't tell you what they really think. So it's really, I'm not actually advocating for every manager to be an asshole. I'd prefer that everyone be respectful and nice to each other, of course, but I do really believe in direct honesty.
Yeah, it's such an important one. Again, relates to a lot of good research that's out there, right? About specific feedback, not just feedback, right? The best managers give very specific feedback, both constructive, right, and positively reinforcing, but just the general praise of, you did a great job. That's not helpful to anybody. It has to be specific. And so that's that's another challenge that I think every manager has, is making sure that they're specific in their feedback. And to your point, if you're going to push people hard, that's something that people appreciate and respect, but make sure you're doing it for everybody. And so that's really great stuff. Kate, I think I think you have a bestseller book on your hands. I hope the world sees it and starts to spread it all over. I think it's incredibly practical advice for every kind of manager, and I think especially so for men who are managers, where it's very approachable advice. There's great stories that illustrate why these things matter. So I wish you the best of luck with it. Thank you for writing it, and we really appreciate you joining Bold Leaders in Learning. You are most certainly one of those bold leaders. So thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. It was really fun to get a chance to talk about all this with you. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you next Thursday.